In the days that followed the discovery of the second murder, Hobbes had hoped for answers, clear, reasonable answers. But instead, the investigation became a blur of contradictions, unanswered questions, and strange coincidences that felt too exact, too intentional to ignore. The victim was a young woman, no older than 25, with no criminal history, no known connections to Edgar Reese or anyone who might explain why she had been chosen. She was found in an abandoned building, arranged just like the others, her body sprawled out in a grotesque pose, her neck marked with the same strange bruises, her face frozen in terror. It was the same signature as Reese's other victims, a ritualistic mark of violence that left a chilling sense of familiarity in the pit of Hobbes' stomach. Reese was dead, and yet, the killings were happening again. Something isn't right, Hobbes muttered under his breath as he examined the crime scene, kneeling next to the victim's body. He could feel the weight of the air, thick with the same tension he'd experienced after the first murder. There was an unsettling stillness that clung to the place, the silence oppressive. He hadn't seen anything like this before. The terror these victims felt, the manner of their deaths, it all felt wrong. It wasn't just that someone was imitating Reese, it was as if the killer was continuing Reese's work. But how? Detective Hobbes, Joan's voice cut through the haze of his thoughts. Hobbes looked up, meeting his partner's tired eyes. "We've found something else." "What now?" Jones hesitated, looking down at the ground. "There's a witness, sort of. A man saw a person leaving the scene. Didn't get a good look at them, but there's something strange about his story. He says it wasn't a man." Hobbes frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. It's like he couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but he could swear the person was glowing. Like some kind of aura around them." Hobbes didn't know whether to laugh or to be disturbed. Glowing. It sounded absurd, but the truth of the matter was, he had been dealing with absurdities since the moment he stepped into the aftermath of Reese's execution. He had to find an explanation, some kind of clue that could help him make sense of the chaos. In the following days, the pattern of killings continued, each murder mirroring the last. Each victim was chosen at random, with no connection to Reese or any apparent motive, yet each death followed the exact same ritualistic signature. The bruises on the neck, the terror-filled faces, the way the bodies were left in places they could not possibly have gone on their own, it all felt too precise, too coordinated. As Hobbes investigated, he started to experience things that defied reason, events that took him beyond the realm of logical deduction and into something far darker. Late one evening, after a long day of chasing down leads, Hobbes found himself alone in his apartment. It was a quiet night, but his mind was far from calm. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about the killings, about the strange way they mirrored Reese's work. It was as if the killer was continuing something Reese had started, or worse, as if Reese himself had never really left. He sat in his living room, staring at the stack of reports scattered across the coffee table. His mind wandered back to the song he had heard earlier, "Time is on my side," the haunting melody that echoed through the apartment, the same song that had played during Reese's trial. He had been hearing it, or at least imagining it, for days now, like a constant companion he couldn't escape. It was a song that didn't seem to belong to the present. It felt ancient, a relic of something evil and long forgotten. As Hobbes sat there, his mind spinning in a spiral of frustration, he heard it again. A whisper, barely perceptible, yet unmistakable. The soft refrain of the song, drifting in from the hallway. "Time is on my side. Yes, it is." Hobbes' heart lurched in his chest, and he stood up abruptly. He looked around the apartment, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the room was empty. The music, though, was still there, faint, as if it were being played in another room. It felt too close, too real to be a figment of his imagination. He walked quickly to the window and glanced out into the street. It was late, the city dark and silent. No one was out there. No one could be playing the song. Still, the music lingered, a constant undercurrent to his thoughts, reminding him of the evil that seemed to be breathing down his neck. Was he losing his mind? Or was this something else entirely? Something he couldn't see, couldn't touch, but that was always there, just beyond his grasp. Over the next few days, Hobbes' paranoia grew. He started to hear the song everywhere he went. It was faint at first, like a whisper on the wind, but then it began to follow him, appearing at the most unsettling moments. In the police station, while reviewing evidence, he'd hear the melody drifting through the air, just out of reach. At the crime scenes, where he hoped for clarity, the song would echo in the background like an ominous presence, as if mocking him for his inability to understand what was happening. And it wasn't just the song. Hobbes began to experience strange occurrences that felt like something supernatural was at work. Sometimes, when he turned a corner, he would feel the unmistakable presence of someone behind him, as if someone were walking just a few steps away, watching him. He'd whip around, but no one would be there. He would catch glimpses of shadows moving in his peripheral vision, just out of reach of his full attention. It wasn't just the environment that had changed. Hobbes himself had begun to change. His sleep patterns were disrupted, his appetite all but gone. He felt a weight pressing down on his chest, a suffocating dread that never lifted. The murders continued, each more brutal than the last, and the song seemed to grow louder, closer, more persistent. One night, as Hobbes was driving home from a late shift at the station, he felt the all-too-familiar sensation that something was wrong. He glanced at his rearview mirror, and for a moment, just a split second, he thought he saw a figure standing in the backseat of his car. His heart skipped a beat, and he slammed on the brakes. When he spun around, the seat was empty, the car was still. There was nothing there, but the feeling didn't go away. It stayed with him, creeping under his skin like a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. Something was out there, something he couldn't explain. It wasn't long before Hobbes started to uncover the truth, or at least, part of it. Late one night, after hours of researching past cases, he stumbled across a name. Azazel, a name that had come up during Reese's trial, whispered in hushed tones among the detectives who had worked the case. Azazel was an ancient demon, one who could possess the living, jumping from one host to the next, always evading death and leaving destruction in its wake. Reese had been obsessed with the name, mentioning it several times in his final hours, his confessions becoming more erratic as he spoke of an entity that had been controlling his every move. But it didn't make sense. How could Reese have been possessed? How could a demon be tied to these killings? And yet, the evidence, the song, the strange feelings, the way the murders continued even after Reese's execution, pointed to something beyond rational understanding. Hobbes' investigation led him to a strange man named Joe, a former priest who had been following the case from the sidelines. Joe was an expert in occult matters, and when Hobbes finally tracked him down, the man didn't hesitate to confirm what Hobbes had been slowly realizing. "It's Azazel," Joe said, his voice low and trembling. "A demon, a fallen angel. It's been around for centuries, jumping from body to body, feeding on fear and death. It's using Reese as a vessel. And now it's trying to use you." Hobbes stared at Joe, his mind struggling to process the words. Could this be true? Could Azazel be the force behind these murders, the same force that had been tormenting him for days? "I don't know how to stop it," Joe continued. "But I can tell you this, it doesn't stop until it's had what it wants. And right now, it wants you. The first signs closes with Hobbes feeling the weight of the terrible truth settle over him. The song is growing louder, and the presence that haunts him is no longer just a figment of his imagination. Azazel is real, and it's after him. Detective John Hobbes had never fully believed in the supernatural. He had spent his career investigating the darkest corners of human nature, finding motives in greed, jealousy, and rage. But as the cases began to pile up, and the peculiarities surrounding Reese's murder became more pronounced, he felt a nagging sensation that something far more sinister was at play. It started with Azazel. Hobbes had always believed that the worst criminals were those who wore the mask of normality, those who could blend into society, hiding their twisted nature beneath a veneer of civility. But Azazel, the man who first introduced himself to Hobbes in the alley behind the diner, was different. He was unnerving in a way that Hobbes could not yet articulate. The first time Hobbes encountered Azazel, he had been trailing the lead from Reese's murder case. The victim was just one in a growing list of strange, ritualistic killings in the city. It seemed like each crime followed a chilling pattern, each victim dying in a grotesque display that seemed to mock both life and death. Hobbes knew that in order to make any sense of it, he would have to find the killer's connection to the victims, something that would tie them all together. It was late one evening when Hobbes first noticed Azazel. The man stood at the edge of the alley, his form silhouetted against the dim streetlights. He had a face that seemed to blend in with the shadows, sharp, angular features that were at once both too symmetrical and unsettlingly off-kilter. He watched Hobbes as if he had been waiting for him. "Detective Hobbes," the man had said, his voice like a whisper in the wind. "You don't know it yet, but you're about to find out something that will change your life. Everything you believe will shatter." Hobbes had paused, narrowing his eyes. "Who are you?" A better question would be, "Who are you?" Azazel replied cryptically, his lips curling into a small, almost playful grin. Before Hobbes could respond, the man vanished into the night as quickly as he had appeared. At first, Hobbes had dismissed the encounter as a strange coincidence, but something about Azazel's presence lingered in the back of his mind. It wasn't just his cryptic words, it was the sense of malevolence that seemed to radiate from him, a kind of darkness that went beyond human understanding.